I had no idea that I am so furious. And she said, well, I'm going to leave now. So we had only about a 2-minute session. Okay? And when she came in the next day, I said, what happened? She said, well, I went home and I went to my Miata and I took the top off it and I floored it and I headed for the coast. And I spent about 2 hours traveling. And I realized how angry how angry I've been at my mother for telling me that I would never be a success unless I was lost all my weight. She's a very, very heavy woman who dressed so beautifully that the appearance of heaviness was, just not there. Really a classy, classy lady. She said, I was really furious at her, and I didn't realize how furious I still am at my first husband. By the time I got home, it was gone. And from that time on, she was able to desensitize to the entire range of the frequency spectrum from 2 to 30 hertz, cycles per second. She felt better very, very rapidly. She began to admit that over the past 2 years, she'd become increasingly depressed, only she didn't know it. Of course, with all the staff cutbacks and the assumption of new responsibilities and no new staff coming on, the stress had been piling up in the background for her. She had no idea that she was this depressed. So she could only see in retrospect from the kind of relief that she felt that there was something that was really weighing very heavily on her. She began to dream intensely. She was very grateful. I got paid very rapidly from the Employee Assistance Program. And so it went. It went like that for everybody else in my practice. So I had to leave there. The psychiatrist accused me of wasting patients. Now, wasting patients is a medical term for referring someone in your practice, a patient, and they get better too soon so that you don't make adequate amounts of income from them. Okay. So I began to see the same effects with people that I saw at my home office. I've been talking with a neurochemist from Los Angeles. His name is Ken Tachiki. He was primarily interested in the work that I'd done with alcoholics using traditional brainwave biofeedback, and we kind of struck up a friendship. I went down there. He worked with a physician down there named Herbert Gross. Gross is a specialist in head injury. He gets patients from all over the world, and basically all these patients are 5 to 7 years post-head injury. All are in heavy litigation, and he and Ken Tachiki actually guide the attorneys and provide evidence for the attorneys to justify the cases. And the documentation for the cases that they provide is really superb. Herb asked me, basically as a dare, whether I would like to use some of my equipment on his patients. Now, at this point, I can readily accept that people with post-traumatic stress disorders and depression do rather well. Okay? But I thought it was the most absurd thing that I ever heard, the idea that someone with a physical injury would benefit from this. Now, I've got a reputation as a curmudgeon and a highly negative individual. And so, while I maintain this kind of a posture, I'll still go ahead and basically do things to try things out. So Herb referred me 5 patients in the first week, and 4 of them were totally better at the end of these 5 20-minute sessions. In terms of their energy levels, they no longer had to take naps. They were no longer irritable and impatient, short-tempered with their families and their coworkers. They didn't rant and rave while they were on roads traveling here and there, and that's really quite a feat in Los Angeles. The 5th one was somewhat better. Not quite back yet, but 4 out of the 5 were doing spectacularly. I was nauseous at this. If I had had no results, I could ignore it. If I had lukewarm results, I could ignore it. But this really becomes to be a pain in the neck, because this then imposes some kind of responsibility to explore what's going on, not to dismiss it, and to take it seriously enough to find out what is happening here. Whether it's we all know how warm a personality that I have, I'm sure. So we need to know how much is due to the warmth and the genuineness of my personality, which we'll call placebo for the moment, and how much is due to the gel that we use for the electrodes, how much is due to perhaps something that the people ate before coming in that just made them feel better. Perhaps it was coincidence that these 4 people just decided or happened to get better on this time. And of course, however unacceptable this was to me, I was hoping that the next 150 patients that would come in would all fail, so that I could then begin to ignore all this stuff again, and that the 4 successes were just really a chance occurrence. I started telling some of the people, physicians and researchers that I know up in Northern California, and they insisted placebo, placebo, placebo. Okay. The physician, Herb Gross, said, interesting. At the end of the week, one of the people on whom a 70-pound stereo set dropped on his head ran into Gross's office and said, basically, I'm cured. Now, this is a fellow who lost his assertiveness. He lost his spark. He's an actor. You've all seen him on TV. He was no longer able to change from one personality to another. He could no longer image himself in a part on the first reading of a script. He lost something very significant. He lost his assertiveness. He basically became a wimp when it came to negotiating with people. And his wife walked into the room on the last day of that first week and saw him harassing someone into sending him a check. And he said, my wife's jaw dropped. And she said, after we got off the phone, he said, you realize you haven't done that in 5 years. Now, some of the subtle cognitive skills don't get better in 5 20-minute sessions, okay? And when I began to see this, then I went from annoyance that it worked as well as it did to annoyance that it didn't work all the time for all circumstances. It's just I have to be negative about something. And some people are never satisfied. So this is the way it looks at this time. People who are very high functioning, who have a long-term or a brief psychological or social trauma, or people who are very high functioning and have a mechanical trauma, a head injury of some kind. There's no loss of consciousness, but that's not strictly true, because some people have lost consciousness for up to an hour and a quarter and have benefited very nicely. But they don't go into a coma. They have concussions. You can bleed. That's allowed. But these people are basically back to their pre-injury emotional and energy status and cognitive functioning as affected by the emotions. In other words, if they can't concentrate because of their anger and irritation that they feel, or the sadness they feel, the resentment that they feel, they can't concentrate because of the emotional reasons, that element is gone at the end of an average of 6 sessions. Now, some of the subtle cognitive stuff I'm not sure about. Harold Russell in Texas, my partner in this crime, has been using this system with people who've had strokes 5 to 7 years ago. They've long since plateaued. Okay? And that includes actually his wife. And an average of 6 sessions, they begin to have voluntary movement. Example, one person can pick up a pencil and not snap it from the death grip. Okay? A few more sessions, another 6 sessions, she was writing with good handwriting. They begin to have voluntary movement. Begin to. These people are not going to have the same kind of hit rate that the mildly head injured or moderately head injured have. They begin to regain sensation. This is not an exercise program. These people are not doing anything. The neurologist who's been on site and the physical therapist have both documented changes. This stuff is not supposed to work according to my preconceptions with these kinds of problems. These kinds of results are, I'll give it the benefit of the doubt, extremely rare in terms of head injury rehabilitation and stroke rehabilitation. There may be someone out there here and there who can get these kinds of results, but for all practical purposes, it's not obtainable in most places. When I went back after the second week and the results were holding, Herb Gross said, "We got something here. You don't know what it is?" And I said, "It's okay, no one else does either." I don't mind not knowing, okay? But I do know that something is happening. Now, much to my relief and disappointment at the same time, he also referred people with borderline personality disorders that he knew and had done professional work with before he began to work with head injuries, and interestingly, they were quite sensitive to the intensity of the lights. By the way, I pretty much use light stimulation with these people. It's simpler without putting the headphones on. It's one less wire, and I hate wires. They're the borderline personality disorders, and for those of you who are unfamiliar with this category, these are people who have difficulties in their relationships with others. They're filled with problems, okay? And generally, people have problems with them. They're taking things too personally. They are very sensitive people, all right? And generally, therapists have major problems dealing with these people because therapists are people too, and they find these people annoying, difficult. And it's not infrequently that you hear from therapists say, "I don't do borderlines," okay? These people are extremely photosensitive. Most of the people who have head injuries are photosensitive too. In fact, I have to dim the lights for them in order to make them tolerable. I may have to restrict the frequency range for almost everybody and begin to desensitize them to the light. So by the end of the first week or beginning of the second week, well, actually by the end of 3 days, the head injured patients are experiencing lights that are 200 times brighter than what I had to experience them. So I had to drop back in the intensity. By the end of that 3 days, they're full intensity lights. But the borderlines, not only did I have to have Bill Stewart modify the system so that we can put a clip on the length of the duty cycle, but I actually had to cut up my Federal Express letter packages, thin cardboard, and sandwich them inside the lights